Sometimes, you just have to take a look at your life and say, where am I? Who am I? What am I doing here? Why am I in a sexy French student film? And sometimes you just have to ask,
what's that thing over my...
Limbo is a game developed by Playdead Studios in 2010 for the Xbox 360. It was given critical acclaim, which led to it being released on a whole host of other consoles, and it's being considered as one of the indie darlings, one of the games that's so good that it proves that indie developers can make games just as good as the AAA guys. But most of its praise has been given to its black and white visuals, and I have to ask, is this a case of style over substance, or does Limbo's beauty go further than skin deep? Let's find out in my mighty review of Limbo. There is no box. It's a downloadable game.
Presentation.
The story of Limbo is mostly to be interpreted, but let me do my best to summarize. You play as an unnamed little boy who wakes up in the grass and begins to run forward. Along the way, you run into traps that will kill you, other children who will try to kill you, and a spider who, of course, tries to kill you. It isn't clear what this boy's goal is, why he's here, or why everyone and everything wants him dead. Most of the story is told through subtle hints that I won't spoil here, but just know that it is told very well. Also, this kid has the upper body strength of Nathan Drake. As you can probably tell by the game footage being shown, this game is gorgeous. Obviously the game is in black and white. There's a grainy texture over the world that gives you an ominous feeling throughout the entire playthrough. The way the shadows work, the animations on the boy, and the general design of this world all lead to an incredible amount of atmosphere that even AAA developers often fail to achieve. Normally, I would dismiss the black and white aesthetic as gimmicky, but it does a lot to help the atmosphere, and the lighting is absolute perfection. It's a tricky look to pull off, and I applaud the developers for absolutely nailing it. The graphics are one thing, but the set pieces are a completely different beast. You see children who hang themselves, dead bodies that you use as platforms, pulling body parts off of insects, and, of course, your own deaths. It's also great to see the world gradually shift from being in a forest with trees and water to seeing people in Stone Age style traps to being in an industrialized box factory. By the end of the game, you begin to feel a sense of isolation that almost makes you miss the kids who were trying to kill you. Lastly, the music is fantastic. It's not exactly something you listen to on your drive to work, but it does complement the game's atmosphere perfectly, going from loud and boisterous to soft and quiet exactly when the game needs it. Even the sound effects are great. They're over-exaggerated, but that helps the player to identify what an object might be in this grayscale aesthetic. I legitimately have nothing to complain about with this game, presentation-wise.
Gameplay.
Limbo utilizes simple controls for complex game mechanics. You have 3 things that you can do in the game: run, jump, and perform an action, which is usually pulling something or activating a switch. You go from left to right until you finish the game. The thing is, what the game does with these simple controls is absolutely astonishing. You start off just performing simple platforming challenges, but soon the puzzles get more and more difficult. Oh, and if this is your first time playing Limbo, you will die. The game uses death as a teaching tool, but with the high amount of checkpoints and lack of any loading times, this never seems unfair or frustrating. Not to mention a game called Limbo is one of the few examples in which dying in a game over and over again makes sense in the context of the story. Now on to the enemies. The only real living enemies you have are the other children and the spider. The spider is kind of like a motivator. It's great to go through a saga until finally beating it, but it also keeps the player moving at a faster pace when the player would typically choose to be cautious. The other children start off being the ones to set the traps and then devolve into just attacking you themselves. There's also a leech type thing that forces you to walk in one direction until walking into light, which changes its direction. It can be eaten off by the beaks hanging from the ceiling. But in reality, the world is the true enemy. The clever puzzles combined with tricky platforming and timing are fun and rewarding without being unfair or frustrating. And on top of that, the variety is absolutely welcome in a game like this. Some might see the game taking 2 to 4 hours to play through as an excuse for this, as though this is a given, this variety should come. And I mean, there are some hidden objects to find, but beyond that, the game doesn't have much in the way of replay value. Most people would see this as a negative, but I think it's the perfect length for this type of game. It's always throwing new mechanics at the player, and they're always implemented creatively. I do think that some aren't fully fleshed out and are used far too little, but on the other hand, this keeps the gameplay fresh as no idea ever becomes boring or tedious. I also wish they had more puzzles combining the different mechanics, but in the end, Limbo is a game that once played will never be forgotten.
Mighty conclusion.
Limbo is a fantastic and beautiful game. It's a game that envelops you in its atmosphere and holds you there until the very end, with its gameplay doing just as much to engross you into the world. It's just such an experience to play, and I know that might sound pretentious, but I really do love this game. That's why I'm not only giving Limbo 9.5 scary-ass spiders out of 10, but I'm also adding it to the MightyNifty must-play list. Also, I'm retroactively adding Katamari Damacy because that game wasn't around when I created this list. This list is dedicated to those games that are just so good, every gamer should experience them at least once in their lives. But with that being said, I hope you enjoyed this review. Feel free to subscribe for more and you'll see my nifty recipe based on this game next week, and perhaps the week after that, a little surprise with Limbo related content continuing. But until then everybody, have a mighty nifty day today.